Thank you so much, Alex. Right, please be advised that this meeting will be recorded. For the most part, you will see either speakers or this kind of slides on the spotlight, meaning that you probably won't be seeing the screen, but please feel free to also turn off your camera if you're not comfortable. We will be also taking some group shots. So again, we will let you know, but please feel free to be off camera or on camera. I think we do have annotation tool working. Could you please try to locate? We will just try. Yeah, I see some hearts on the screen. No sweat, but let's try to locate a pencil icon on your screen. Can you? That's an annotation tool. It's built in Zoom, and we'll just try to drop hearts right now. We'll use hearts and eraser for today because we have just short time, but I do see your names and hearts. So thank you for dropping your love in this space. So if Alex, if we could please go to the next slide, and we probably will need to erase it just so that we can use the other slide. The other next slide together. Okay, so we did want to know who is in the same room with us. So if you are an art practitioner or community organizer or work for a local art service organization, LASO for short, or a dear funder that make our project possible, could you please put a heart next to that box? If you are anything other, could you please let us know in the chat what industry or field you're coming from? We also do want to acknowledge that many of us may struggle with our children being at home. I myself am on the same page. You may hear my son knocking on the door. So we just want to say again, we're all in this together, and we will totally understand if we will see them popping into the screen, into your room. If you have your pets with you, please bring them to the screen, because I'm sure everybody always loves to see some pets. It will make us all happy. And of course, if you're not here, you still need another cup of coffee. Drop a not probably coffee. Zoom doesn't have coffee emoji, but drop a heart just there. Let's see, many LASOs. That's awesome. Right now, actually, most of folks are from LASOs. No funders? I doubt that. I think I saw some names that represented some funders, or you don't want to identify and make us uncomfortable. Hello, Cecilia. Community organizers, we have four art practitioners only. Really cannot believe it. So many LASOs again. Are you guys having trouble with finding locating the Zoom hearts? If that is the case, please drop just your messages in the chat. It's absolutely, it's an activity that we can, do whatever we can do with this technology. I see my kids are in the same room. Hi there. Please raise your hand. You can maybe raise your hand if your kids are joining on the Zoom screen. And so far, I think no dogs or cats. And someone is getting another cup of coffee. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And I think we will just go, Alex, please, to the next slide. If we could actually erase this, I think it could be delete all. That's what it is on Zoom. We're all learning as we go. But if we could do that, maybe we could, how about we have so many hearts, and hearts are very beautiful as they are. How about I can see that somebody located stars. How about using stars to locate yourselves in Toronto? We'll leave, okay, beautiful. Use either heart or a star and locate yourself where you're connecting from. Thank you so much. We already see people, popping up. Awesome. We have already Etobicoke Center, the Davenport, Etobicoke Lakeshore, Toronto Danforth, Humber River has a heart, York Center, Scarborough Center, hi there. A lot of people are in the West End. Nice, somebody is joining from lovely Regent Park today. North York and York Southwestern. Awesome. A lot of people actually from Scarborough Southwest as well. That's amazing. East End. That's pretty good. Thank you so much. We will probably take the slides off and we will slowly go into our meeting, how everybody is feeling. Thank you so much. It was very nice to meet you and know where you're at, whether you need another cup of coffee or like where all your kids are with us today. Thank you. Okay, how is everybody feeling? Can we try to use emojis because we will use them during the meeting. Try to be interactive. Nice, thank you. There is a heart I can see and coffee. Could you please try to use emojis? There is reaction button on the bottom of your screen and just try to use anything like hearts would be always appreciated. But also I tried it today. If you search coffee, it will come up with an emoji of a coffee cup. And please still continue use the chat option because you always can drop your name, pronounce, organization, or if you're independent, what you do, and the links to your work. Thank you, amazing. Okay, well, thanks everyone. I hope you do feel warmed up. We now are ready to officially hit off our town hall. And without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Shanna Hillman, Executive Director of East End Arts, and Marlene McIntosh, Executive Director of Urban Arts, to open our town hall with land acknowledgement and African ancestral acknowledgement, respectively.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you for bearing with us when we figured out tech at the beginning. I did just get a note from, apparently I have that I'm away because I hit that coffee thing. Alex has, I just have one piece of housekeeping. Alex has asked that people name yourselves whatever name you registered with, because that's how we figure out what breakout group you asked to be in. So when you're renaming yourselves, please do that. So as was mentioned, my name's Shayna and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Executive Director of East End Arts. And I always like to say and explain, just in case, I'm a blonde woman and I'm sitting here in an office area, and behind me is a big map of the city of Toronto with all of our neighborhoods and the neighborhood names. And before we dive into today's session, I just want to start by acknowledging that all of our work takes place on the traditional territory of so many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed by multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. In keeping with these treaties, East End Arts, and I know all of our Canopy Steering Committee members, are committed to the ongoing stewardship of the land and, of course, the community. And I know one of the ways we do this is by holding space for big conversations where we can come together and learn from and with community members and the artists living and working in our neighborhoods. And ultimately, when we come together like this, we collaborate and we work together to create change. And of course, all of us as community artists do this by encouraging the telling of stories and making art that directly engages with the landscape of our neighborhoods. And the more we do that, I know we build a greater understanding of the landscape that leads to a greater respect of the traditional stewards of this land to whom we are so deeply indebted. I wanted to pass it to my colleague, Marlene from Urban Arts.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shayna. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as immigrants, settlers, or newcomers in this generation or generations past. I would like to acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and later through the Underground Railroad. Across Ontario and Canada are many segregated and or unmarked graves of people of African descent, such as the ones in Clearview and Oro, both former Black settlements just north of Toronto. This is in no way to detract from or to compare to the Indigenous experience, because as with both cultures, memorials are part of what it means to be human. During slavery, the burial of Black bodies was important for Africans and African Canadians whose humanity was often contested. And so this acknowledgement celebrates the sanctity of Black lives and the importance of our shared history. Therefore, I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanna. Thank you so much, Marlene. Our town hall is officially commenced, and we would like to welcome our dear participants, speakers, guest speakers, moderators, and funders that make our work possible to our Community Arts Canopy Town Hall. This event is jointly organized by Arts Etobicoke, Art Starts, East End Arts, Jumblees, Lakeshore Arts, Neighborhood Arts Network, North York Arts, Scarborough Arts, Sketch, and Urban Arts, and it is generously funded by Ontario Arts Council and Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategies Fund. To provide some background, last year we worked together with Nordicity and the Toronto Arts Foundation to investigate the dynamic shift to digital and virtual spaces for community arts organization practitioners, but also local art service organizations in Toronto. This project aimed to assess the effectiveness of strategies and practices that we've all been using during the pandemic, as well as challenges that we have encountered in moving to virtual models. So today is the day that we'll hear about this report from Nordicity. As well, we'll hear from the City of Toronto about the status of their Community Cultural Development Review in the first part of the town hall. There will be second part to it. We will then, after the first part, have a break and let our guest speakers, dear guest speakers and funders go. We'll say bye. And then after the break, community art practitioners will be invited back to join our safe and supportive breakout rooms to brainstorm and share our best practices. So again, just repeating, please be advised that this meeting is already recorded. So just feel free to turn off your camera if you would like. My name is Ksenia Tsoy. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm a community-based visual and mural artist based in Scarborough, Toronto, and it is my great pleasure and honor to facilitate today's meeting. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Shanna to take us through our community agreement.
Thank you so much. If I could get the community agreement slide. So I think that everyone got this when you registered through Eventbrite. There was a link to click to read it, but I just wanted to go over it, especially after our first meeting that we had the last time. Basically, we wanted to just remind everyone that we're entering today's space with an open mind and an open heart and open ears, and we're going to leave our egos and any spirit of offense at the door. We understand that any form of racism, misogyny, homophobia, or transphobia, ableism, or other forms of hatred, bias, or discrimination will not be tolerated. And if anything happens and you feel uncomfortable at any point during today, please feel free to message us. You can message us directly in the chat function and we can deal with it. We'll work to acknowledge power dynamics in our discussions and allow space for all to contribute regardless of our professional titles or our personal identities. And we understand that all constructive ideas, thoughts, and experiences are welcome and are encouraged to be shared without judgment or fear of future consequences. But as mentioned, our breakout groups will be for practitioners only. So feel free to be as transparent and as open as possible there. And I like to acknowledge that we're all learning. I feel like I learn something new every day, and it's okay not to know and and we won't judge others for not knowing. And there's another slide, I think. And that we kind of will also there might be some humility and some discomfort, and that's okay. And it's how we learn, and know that there are many different voices, opinions, and experiences that are going to be participating today that we all want and deserve to be heard. And while the Community Arts Canopy will provide opportunities for some to speak and share, we know there's not going to be enough time for everyone. And so we will encourage people to share their thoughts, questions, and feedback in the chat, on social media. You'll notice there's the hashtag on the bottom, Arts Canopy 2022, and then as well to follow up with us in email. And again, if you have any problems at any time, then just message myself, any of the steering committee members, and then as well in the breakouts as well.
Thank you very much, Shanna. Thank you for beautiful reminders of how we can create this space, safe and supportive space together. I think we're ready to bring on our guest speaker, Mila de Chef-Tweddle. Mila is Director, Policy Analysis and Stakeholder Engagement at Nordicity. Mila, the mic is yours.
Hi, thanks. I might just get whoever's sharing screen to drop your screen and then I'll share mine. Thank you so much. Bear with me 1 second. We're all used to this. Okay, great. So, sorry, just getting myself organized here. So yeah, thanks so much. It's really great to be here with all of you and have a chance to kind of share this great work that we all pulled together as a team with it. Oh, hang on. There we go. So I mean, I think Ksenia sort of already introduced a little bit the research that we did, but effectively last year we engaged in some research to investigate that shift to digital and virtual delivery for community arts, and kind of understand, you know, what strategies and practices were used and how effective they were, and what some of the kind of challenges and barriers were to that experience as that kind of great pivot. Everyone's so sick of that word, but it's the word. And then, you know, ultimately the idea was to kind of use that as a launch point to kind of identify tools and supports that could help strengthen the abilities of community arts organizations and practitioners to serve their communities virtually. Even particularly, you know, what was interesting is as we were going through this research, we were shifting into this kind of, I don't want to say post-pandemic, but kind of post-ish pandemic reality of kind of returning to in-person programming, but kind of facing the realities of sort of the impact that the pandemic had in terms of expectations for virtual and hybrid delivery as well. So I'll just do the super annoying consultant thing and tell you a little bit about our process. So the project team, I think as Ksenia mentioned, was composed of a team from Nordicity. So I'm here, the face, but I had a great team working with me at Nordicity. So I can by no means take even the majority of the credit. And then we were also working really closely with the research and impact team at the Toronto Arts Foundation. So I saw Sean in the room. So thank you to you and your team as well for all the work and contributions to the research. And then we were also supported very closely by Shayna, as well as you know, a steering committee composed of executive directors from the Toronto LASOs and other participating organizations from the Canopy. And so the team kind of worked together to develop a research framework that was, you know, we did some desk research. We also based it on kind of existing conversations that had been happening already within the context of the Canopy about the benefits and challenges brought to community arts as a result of adopting digital programming and the kind of broader changes happening in the audience needs and preferences since the onset of COVID. And then we kind of subsequently pursued 3 lines of research to capture the needs from community arts organizations, practitioners, as well as participants and community members. So we conducted interviews with 10 directors from the Toronto LASOs and select Canopy members. And those were kind of designed to assess the impact of the pandemic on the organization's programming and audience engagement and impact measurement practices. And then we also conducted 5 focus group interactions with, I think that engaged roughly kind of 44-ish community arts practitioners. And those sessions were designed to assess the pandemic's impact on the transformation of arts practice and audience engagement for those community arts practitioners. And then finally, we distributed a survey to community arts participants and community members via the Canopy members. And that kind of yielded responses on to assess the audience's digital needs, their preferences, the challenges and impacts that shift to digital had on the actual participants. So without further ado, I will take you all through super quickly. It's quite a detailed report. I believe it was circulated in advance, so I'm going to really whip through kind of high level because I don't have a ton of time with you today. But so just kind of on the organizational side, community arts organizations indicated that they would definitely need, I think, a new strategy to maintain a hybrid programming model on an ongoing basis, just because of those kind of fundamental shifts and some of the benefits that kind of came to light of offering that option. So that kind of, that means that they're kind of thinking about and trying to adapt to redefined program formats. So, organizations obviously found that some formats and program types were easier to transform into virtual formats than others. And virtual programming obviously presented a number of challenges for all types of programming, especially in a sector that's really based in that kind of in-person connection and interaction. But, for sure, many indicated that digital programming brought opportunities to collaborate with a wider range of partners and provide kind of artists and practitioners with additional, and there's also a need to provide artists and practitioners with additional training, guidance, and support in order to be able to deliver that kind of redefined program format. Then what was interesting is, I think quite unanimously, there was this realization that a shift to virtual digital programming definitely extended audience reach, new approaches to promoting programming, and then the kind of increased reach to, and discoverability that community arts organizations experienced increased their capacity to reach and connect with a wider audience. But while that was great, obviously the extended reach of virtual programming also means that these organizations had to, or are having to kind of grapple with the need to balance the needs of the local community and the new audiences they're reaching, while continuing to kind of prioritize their primary local target audience. It's also kind of interesting that virtual programming enabled more multi-generational and family participation. And it presented kind of that opportunity for community arts organizations to support ongoing community building in that way, which I think in person has been a little bit more challenging. In terms of kind of participation and engagement, the virtual programming eliminated some barriers to access for certain audiences. So that's part of that expanded reach, was just some people were now be able to participate who couldn't participate necessarily in person. But at the same time, on the flip side, it also uncovered new barriers for some of the existing participants that were engaging with community arts, things like lack of access to adequate internet connection, not having devices that allow them to participate virtually, sometimes just lacking the kind of time or space to engage virtually in that type of setting, or lack of kind of comfort using digital platforms. So, I mean, as we just saw today, a lot of us, even many of us who have been using these digital platforms for a few years now are still, we still have these little hiccups. So there's definitely that struggle. And so community arts organizations are definitely having to re-examine the accessibility issues in the digital space and adapt to them. So when it comes to kind of engagement, virtual programming brings challenges related to the ability for practitioners to kind of interact more candidly with the participants, and also kind of understand or get that sort of informal feedback of whether or not those participants are actually actively engaged in the program. It also kind of for sure uncovered uneven cultural impacts on historically marginalized communities, and as I mentioned earlier, it can definitely, the virtual context can definitely alter the value and impact of certain types of programming experiences or audiences. So virtual programs definitely need to be designed differently and thought of differently in order to achieve their intended outcomes. So when it comes to measuring success, community arts organizations definitely in the virtual context, I think overall, but particularly in the virtual digital context, need better tools and approaches to effectively measure the impact of virtual and digital programming. So community arts organizations have had to rely primarily on participation numbers as a key metric in this new context. However, kind of as I just mentioned, it can be difficult to gauge the engagement level or how that engagement is having an impact on the participants in a virtual context. And it's really challenging to kind of equate participation with any metric of engagement, let alone measuring the impact of that engagement. So things like collecting qualitative data to measure impact has also been challenging in a virtual context. Community arts organizations rely on both formal qualitative feedback as well as candid kind of real-time feedback from participants to help inform that. And those are both really heavily hindered in a virtual context just because the format, the challenges that those formats pose, in terms of like hindering interaction and two-way engagement, the technical and accessibility challenges that we mentioned in terms of like just being able to collect feedback from participants and that kind of thing. And there's also a gap between the digital skills and capacity of community arts organizations and the available tools that could be used for measuring success and impact in virtual programming. On the funding and digital support side of things, this research definitely showed that community arts organizations will need new funding models and kind of adapted eligibility criteria to support additional capacity for the design and delivery of quality virtual programming, and really just maintaining a sustainable hybrid model. So on the one hand, in the short term, community arts organizations need capital and operating support to invest in and maintain tools, platforms, software, equipment for virtual delivery. On the other hand, delivering digital programming or maintaining a hybrid programming model also requires additional human resources capacity, particularly in the hybrid situation where you've got kind of you're duplicating the effort effectively to develop and deliver both in-person and hybrid programming. And virtual programming often increases the time and effort of program development, design, and delivery just on its own because it's a whole other beast. And then finally, community arts organizations and practitioners require the training and skills development, as well as just kind of general tech support in order to be able to deliver and facilitate virtual programming effectively. So, while virtual delivery has increased audience reach, community arts organizations also need to be able to balance that opportunity against, their resource and capacity and the need to kind of continue to maintain their mandates to provide free or low-cost programming to kind of local community members. On the practitioner side of things, artists reported that they began to transform their practice and programming to be more kind of mobile. For example, some artists adopted new programming formats that were more self-directed or reflected the importance of adaptation in community arts practice. Arts practitioners indicated that there was a lack of, the real challenge for them was kind of not having access to guidelines and support in order to properly prepare and deliver digital programming. So for example, they didn't necessarily know what the guidelines should be for how to interact with participants in a virtual format, what functions to enable in a Zoom meeting, for example, and when to use certain functions and what strategies can be used to engage with audiences and have that two-way interaction or encourage participation. And then also just, how to navigate kind of challenging discussions or comments or inappropriate behavior in a virtual setting. If they've never done that in a virtual setting, it was really challenging to try to navigate that without really access to any guidelines on how to do it. In addition, as practitioners transformed their practice to accommodate remote teaching and digital interaction, they expressed a need for digital knowledge and skills training. So some of the specific skills area where additional training is required or was required would have included accessibility, knowing how to address accessibility standards like AOTA compliance, Accessibility Ontario. Forget that acronym. Sorry, I should really have remembered the acronym, but it's the Accessible Ontario something Act. Anyway, digital copyright, and then also technology skills. So those are some skills areas that they felt they needed support in. And then there was also, artists also expressed a need for kind of support to invest in better high-speed internet connections, invest in equipment and digital subscriptions. They really had to invest a lot in kind of building up the underlying infrastructure to help them deliver this digital programming. It also, delivering digital programming resulted in additional kind of expenses for them and just effort in setting up the session. So they had to rethink how they were delivering their practice. And so that just obviously required a lot of time and effort and investment on their part. But funding and fees and things often either stayed the same or in some cases kind of decreased in the context of virtual program delivery. So there was definitely a sense that they needed better support for that. Artists also needed guidance, I think, on just kind of knowing how to budget and expense costs associated specifically with digital program delivery. Even just navigating that and planning for it was a challenge. And then finally, knowledge sharing and collaboration was identified as a key need. So there's definitely a need for online creative collaboration spaces for artists where they can inform each other's practices and share digital resources and brainstorm on shared skill sets. Just moving swiftly on to participant needs. So the survey, as I mentioned, we did a survey to solicit some feedback from participants across, across the networks of the various LASOs and community arts organizations we were working with. And the survey definitely indicated that digital programming provided access to more program options for participants, which many or most perceived as providing value and enjoyable experiences to them. However, there was an indication that in continuing to deliver digital programming, community arts organizations will need to focus and practitioners will need to focus on certain barriers and challenges that might hinder participation in virtual programming. So things like appointment viewing. So if you're scheduling a session at an inconvenient time, so on demand, for example, would be better than a scheduled session. Some folks also encountered other challenges that were outside the kind of scope of the program itself, things like technical issues or that digital divide, lack of access to reliable internet connection or equipment, and just you know, not having access to the kind of time and space to be able to participate as well. So flexibility in terms of schedule is key to audience accessibility, and definitely being able to offer technical support might also help alleviate some of those challenges to access and participation as well. And so the survey, while virtual programming was generally viewed as valuable, as I just mentioned, the survey also revealed that community arts organizations need to find ways to increase participants' interaction and engagement during digital programming. So there was definitely a sense that kind of that was what was lacking, was that two-way engagement. So respondents indicated that learning new things, engaging with people, and inclusivity and accessibility were the most important aspects of virtual programming being successful for them, and opportunities to engage and interact was also one of the top selected success factors for whether or not they were satisfied with their experience in virtual programming. Furthermore, socializing and engagement were the top reasons that respondents found you know, they were less satisfied or that they found were missing from those digital experiences. So that's definitely a key focus in terms of improving that digital programming moving forward. So all of this was boiled down into a set of recommendations, and I think those are going to be kind of the launch point for our discussion in a bit. So the first one was kind of adopt effective hybrid programming. So just you know, updating organization and program policies and protocols. You know, a sustainable long-term hybrid model also requires kind of training and guidelines on virtual programming delivery, as well as investment in digital hardware and software and infrastructure. The second one was to adapt the digital working environment through kind of continuous digital knowledge upskilling, you know, for both staff and community arts practitioners alike. Third was identifying kind of the additional work or effort required for digital programming. So just better understanding, you know, what resources and workflows are needed to kind of deliver effective community arts programming, to help clarify what additional resources might be needed to support that work, and what types of resources more specifically. And then, so related to that is, you know, a recommendation to advocate for additional kind of support that really meets those needs in terms of transitioning to hybrid programming. And then last but not least, developing effective evaluation and impact measurement for virtual programming, just to address some of those needs related to kind of the struggle to collect that data and measure beyond just participation. That is everything. I realized I went over time. I'm so sorry. There was a lot to cover.
Thank you so much, Mila. That is fantastic. Knowing we did go over time, and just knowing as well that all of our breakout groups will be talking about those 5 recommendations moving forward. And everyone was really good when they registered and said what their first and second choices were. And we tried really hard to make that happen. I did want to just quickly ask the group if anyone had questions about the methodology and the process for you, maybe. And if you do, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. But if no one has any questions, because I know we will be talking about all of these 5 recommendations. I know the one that I'm really interested in is the how are we going to pay for it? Which I always am, then I might say thank you, but I know that you're going to stay and you're going to dip in and out of our breakout groups, which will be really exciting, and hear from folks. But I want to thank you. And now I want to invite Pat Tobin, the brand new General Manager of Economic Development and Culture from the City of Toronto. We all know Pat from his previous position, and what an amazing champion he is for the arts. And I know many of us participated in the community cultural development review, focus groups, and surveys this summer. And so we're going to ask Pat to kind of give us an update about what's going on at the city with that process and some of the other things with a lens towards community arts.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks very much for inviting me, and congratulations on a great turnout. And thanks everybody for contributing your time to the discussion. So I will ask if this slide could come down, and I'll share my screen. There we go. Okay. Great. So that looks like it's working. Looking for nodding heads. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. As Sean said, I'm the general manager as of a couple weeks ago for economic development and culture. And notably, I come from the culture side of the house. So we take it internally as a good sign that there's confidence that culture is such a critical part of Toronto's economy that they were able to look at a culture person to do the work. So I'm going to take you through, as Shanna said, the community cultural development review, but also a number of things that are going on in the city that relate to trying to strengthen arts outside the core. So I'm just going to turn on a little timer here. So first, we've got a division that was noted, combines economic development and culture for a reason that we both feel that the creative industries are an important part of Toronto's economy, but also that culture at all levels of the city is one of Toronto's strongest attributes in terms of attracting talent, investment, people wanting to come and visit. So we see that there's a really strong relationship between the two, and we try to think about the economic part of culture and vice versa as much as we can. We do that through the 4 sections that you see here: arts and culture services, where you'd find Julie Frost and her group. Film and entertainment is really the creative industries. Museums and heritage services with Cheryl Blackman, our 10 sites across the city, and business growth services, the academic side. What we do, so really briefly, in July, we took a plan to council saying, here's what we're going to focus on for the next 2 years, knowing that a new council would get put in place relatively soon. So I've highlighted 2 areas because these areas relate to how we're going to approach economic, community, and cultural development outside the core. First is number 3 here highlighted. We're going to have a big focus on inclusive economic development, working at the neighborhood level, whereas historically Toronto did a lot of work at the sort of the macroeconomic level, attracting investment, ensuring that we built up a strong set of industries across the country, industrial and professional services downtown. But we're really going to be looking at working at a neighborhood level. And if you look at things like Little Jamaica, you'll see the beginnings of that work. And the other number 4 here, enhancing support for arts and culture. For this, the city, and if you're reading the paper today, recognizes that while its financial situation is going to be a bit challenged in the next few years in a combination of lingering costs associated with the pandemic and significant drop in our revenues, also related to pandemic recovery, we have to think about everything the city has, not just our grants, to ensure that we're supporting arts and culture. And so for the city, that's grants to be sure, but also what are we doing with the property we own? What are we doing with how we regulate the use of land? What are we doing with taxation? And so we're going to be looking across all those fronts. And that was sort of the thinking that brought us to the Community Cultural Development Review. So I mentioned off the top that we're going to have a significant focus on ensuring that there's adequate support outside the core, which bears that we need to define what core means. So for this city, we have a planning framework called TO Core, and it defines the core of the city, as you see in that first bullet, as being Bathurst to the west, Rail Corridor, Rosedale Valley Road to the north, Don Valley to the east, and the water to the south. Now, 60% of the city's funding, the TAC and the city-directed programs, land into that catchment. However, that outside of the core, that's where you find 49% of the city's GDP, 65% of the jobs, 75% of our overall tax base, 91% of the population, and 97% of our land. So while there are important reasons that there's a large amount of money going into the core, historic cultural institutions, for example, that employ artists from across the city, perhaps that balance is not yet correct, and this is going to be a focus of how we shift the distribution of resources to move more outside the core. We've been working at this for a little while. I'll just touch on a few things that we have done to try to address it. The first is let's try to move our operations to a greater degree outside the core. So Nuit Blanche's expansion is one example. Artworks, the city's year of public art, also had citywide coverage. You've seen the cultural hotspot increasingly focused on areas where there's rapid development, as well as some acute needs like Little Jamaica and Golden Mile in Scarborough. Clark Center just opened about 8 months ago. And certainly the city museums are working hard to ensure that they're serving their communities outside the core. We've also invested more in the LASOs. So there's a typo there, but in the 10 years since 2011, the LASO budget has gone up 341%, which is more than any other city program. And then over that, we've tried to work with LASOs as sort of key partners in any major city initiative, such as Show Love TO, Artworks TO, and recognizing that's one-time project funding and it comes with a carrying cost, we have been able to move a significant amount of investment, $650K in 21 through the LASOs. We need to do more. So the TAC currently carries about 70% of our granting resources. So that's $25 million budget, 23 plus goes out in grants. They have been working really hard under their equity framework to become more responsive to the needs of artists and arts organizations outside the core. I'll choose just the Black Arts program, for example, that was announced in July of 2020, and they're looking at how to reduce the barriers to access for operating grants for organizations outside the core, such as dropping requirements to have a certain number of successfully completed projects. So what do we need to do more? This is our full slate of reports that we are scheduled to bring to council in the next 15 months. All of the highlighted ones, I believe, have a relationship to strengthening arts and culture outside the core. I'm just going to touch on a few of them. At the top, you see culture grants and creating a new program called Culture Access and Development. We've been directed by council to look at all of our programs and make them increasingly transparent, accountable, competitive, ultimately, set against certain clear criteria and policy objectives. So we'll be heading to council in the early part of 23 to explain what that means as we build a new program that replaces the former major cultural organizations program. And we also come back in a few months and talk about our festival strategy, having built a new festivals program, and how we'll actually work to improve the city's support to festivals across the city. Public art strategy, after a successful year of public art, which really was a test bed for how you do art more inclusively, public art more inclusively, we're going to work to make sure that those changes are permanent. The results of Artworks were significant. We had 1,400 artists, 350 new projects, 85% of the artists were BIPOC. And so we really want to ensure that the access we open up in the year of public art becomes built into city systems. Cultural districts is a new one and stems from multiple pieces of council direction to look at supporting communities facing threats to their cultural heritage, tangible and intangible, with supports granting public realm, festivals, etc. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on that in the next few months. And then at the bottom, you see we'll be working on a new strategy to include specific strategies around film, interactive digital media, esports, etc. Just zeroing in on a couple of those things really briefly. I think I've touched on all of these, but now I'll pick up on the community cultural development review. So as Shauna said off the top, thank you very much for many of you who participated. Process was engaged to look at the way the City of Toronto supports culture outside the core across all of the tools that it has, how it uses its property, how it provides access for its parks, how it permits, how it provides grants, how it manages taxation and land use planning. So everything. So it's a big project. Our intent is, knowing that the city has some financial challenges, we have to think about how we support cultural development outside the core across all of these fronts. And we ask, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to do more of, what do we need to do less of. So that research continues. There were surveys through Check Market, thank you, 1,000 people, I'm sure many of you participated, 2 focus groups, 20 people each, one-on-one interviews with 7 people, and a lot of data, research, and analysis. So that will continue, and we hope in the coming months to be able to have results to be able to discuss in greater depth. And then after that, what do we need to do? We need to get better about collecting data, not different from what Mila was saying. We need to be collectively much better about telling the results of our cultural investments and where gaps exist, why they need to be filled. For investing in culture outside the core, this is, collectively getting our heads around what are really good outcome measures, such as we need to commit to having, a cultural opportunity per week within 1 kilometer for every resident of Toronto, no matter where they live. For years, we've talked a lot about input numbers and how much the investment is, but there's a growing demand on the part of council for us to talk about what the money buys. And so that's going to be a big focus of our research as well. Happily, there's a movement towards combining organizations like Mass Culture, some of the university colleges to assist municipalities with that. We're also seeing collaboration among cities and public art funders. The Canada Council will be working towards looking at equity and funding over the course of the next 6 months, and has engaged public art funders to look at where the gaps exist and what might be done to ensure that arts funding, public arts funding at least, is equitably distributed. Space is a huge deal. Where we may not have the resources to grant our way through every problem, the city has land, the city has space. And we've created a strategic real estate arm called TradeTO, and we're deep into a conversation about what assets exist that the city no longer uses that might suggest themselves for adaptive uses, cultural venues. So more to come on that, early stages. I think we also recognize, and those folks on the call here would live it every day. We need to think about a new approach to leadership development to support arts organizations, particularly those outside the core, looking at the levels of burnout and turnover that we're seeing. And finally, we need to make some strong connections between the not-for-profit sector and the community arts sector and the booming creative industries in Toronto, many of whom have seen the development in Etobicoke, Scarborough, even North York, Downsview, where we are seeing jobs coming online in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, in film and screen-based. And we need to work to ensure creatives have access to those opportunities, and diverse creatives do, so that we have a workforce reflective there of the city. So that's really quickly a number of things I wanted to cover. We'll come back to you with more information about the Community Cultural Development Review, but a little bit more work needs to be done. Happy to take any questions, and my email is here, which I'll throw into the chat so I can take down the screen. And I just want to thank you all for participating and for Arts Canopy for the invitation to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Pat. I know that was a lot. And it's really fantastic. And thank you so much for putting your email in the chat. You might regret that later. And then also, we've had some people ask in the chat if we'd be able to get a copy of the slide deck to send out afterwards. So I'll put that with you. And then if anyone had any questions for Pat, now I'd ask you to put them in the chat or raise your hand and we can come to you. We're running a little behind, but we're going to do some questions because I think it's really important. And then we'll carve into our bio break that way. Does anyone have any questions for Pat? I think actually, while we're waiting for questions to pop up, I just wanted to mention that I know that the slide where it talked about the increase to the LASO portfolio program looks quite shocking, and it's a lot. And I know we're really grateful for that. But just putting that in context for some folks at that time, North York Arts and East End Arts weren't even in existence. So that also a big chunk of that is that's 2 new organizations coming into existence, but then there also have been significant and very much appreciated increases as well. Does anyone have anything for Pat? If not, I'm going to pass it to Ksenia and we're going to go into a bio break. But I did you have anything else, Pat?
No, I just want to thank you. And I want to note, as the note here in the chat, that a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, like to use the example of space, is going to take a lot of work. And we recognize that. We've created an office for creative space, stealing Erica Henneberry from the Toronto Arts Council, who many of you know. And we're really committed to creating like sort of a client-focused group that'll help problem solve at the level of individual projects, but also open up more space in a broad way. So please do take me up on the invite to send me a note with any of your questions from this presentation, and I'll get you the deck right after this.
Thank you so much, Pat. And I know that space is something at East End Arts that we've heard over and over and over again as we as the pandemic went on. We heard from so many community groups who lost their spaces for rehearsal, to store their instruments, to have events. And that has been something that I know we've been hearing a lot. And I know it's so nice to know that this new Office of Creative Space is happening. And we love Erica.
So do we. All right. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'll leave you to your bio break.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you so much, Mila. Thank you both, our guest speakers. I know it's a lot, and probably the reason we don't have questions yet is because it will take us time to also process it. We do have a link to the report that Mila presented, so we could share that, and Pat just promised to again repeat to those who ask questions whether we can have an access to the presentation. Pat just promised that yes, we will, and so I think that will be also helpful for us to kind of read it again, and also, and probably then we'll have questions, and Pat did share his email in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. I think this is that break in between the 2 parts of our town hall. We are now prepared for a more like maybe less formal and maybe even more warm I don't know if it would be, but it will be all about collaboration. It will be all about you speaking in more intimate groups than this. We will let our funders go just again, and that was intentional. We love you. We're thankful to you, but we do want to create this space for practitioners to not feel pressured by what you might hear if they have challenges that they want to share with each other. And so again, that is to repeat to our practitioners, so you are coming back to a space when you will be where you would be talking with your colleagues, with your peers. From now on, now it's 11:05. Shall we please take a 10 minutes break, bio break, and return at 11:15? That would be. Please feel free to turn off your mic and your camera. Take your time, and at 11, I'm repeating 11:15, we will be meeting back. Bye-bye, everyone who joined from the funding side, and our guest speakers. I know that Mila will be floating in the rooms, but also Pat, you're welcome to. If not, we will see you again, and thank you for letting us know your contact details. See you very soon, guys.
This meeting is being recorded.
This meeting is being recorded, so we just started it. Feel free to, again, turn off your camera, or of course, just stay here with us and be in this documentation of our shared experience today. Thank you for some hearts being dropped. That is pretty much it. We've done a big chunk of work already. We will just go through presenting what we have learned and heard in each of their breakout rooms. And pretty much after that, and a little bit of reflection, we will be saying goodbyes. By 1 p.m. everybody should be free. Now it's noon. Would anyone like to go first, or perhaps we just go by order? I will just read again. I will remind you of the group names. So for example, if would someone from group number 1 would like to share, and group number 1 is how to succeed in delivering hybrid programming. Would anyone would like to share? Just take 5 minutes each to share what you've heard, what you've learned together.
Hey, Ksenia, I mostly just took notes, but others are also welcome to talk as well if I'm missing anything from this group, but I'm happy to share if that's okay. So we had a lot of points. I was trying to narrow them down because I was taking a lot of detailed notes while they were talking. But we had a lot of perspectives from individual artists, organizations, folks working in director capacities, management roles, also community members and community artists as well, delivering programs directly in the community too. Folks came from various demographics and lived experiences and had experiences with also various mediums of art practice too. So some of the points that we had was there was a shift in programming objectives for many folks. There was learning that needed to happen for artists and for the organizations themselves to be more deliberate in their strategies of delivering workshops that met the needs of communities and people as a whole. So not just within their professional roles, but also their health and wellness as well. And financial literacy was also spoken about. There were creative solutions to programming and programming delivery that were spoken about too. Some examples being apps that are now available through smartphones that make creating digital production a lot more accessible for folks who do have access to smartphones. There was also some talk about resources that folks used, individual artists and community members as well in accessing grants that allowed for folks to take some time off to actually really genuinely be able to do some work in themselves to discover how to best deliver their workshops online or deliver their art practice online. And that was thanks to some grants through TAC, RBC was mentioned as well. Some successes too that folks had was training that was being delivered by some organizations that were either free or were able to access through paid trainings too, such as through Creative Facilitation Camp that is delivered each year through partners in youth empowerment, as well as through there were different models that were spoken about in regards to hybrid models of navigating online that's not just exclusive to Zoom or like Google Meets. So we spoke about Power Town, Kumo space that gave agency to folks moving in virtual spaces more. Lots of things were talked about. I might just give a couple more points. We also talked about capacity challenges that were also faced with folks and how that impacted organizations that did not have access to funding. And we also spoke about how organizations were able to share their resources. So some folks were able to, with the resources they had, create online and hybrid models more quickly, and then share those resources with the community through teaching or community sharing as well. So I'll leave it at that if anybody else wants to put in points.
If anybody didn't in fact have anything to add, please feel free. We will take another minute for group number 1. And if no other comments are in the space, we could go to room number 2. Okay, I think nobody raised other points. How about moving to group number 2, reminding you that group number 2 discussed how, excuse me, how to cultivate digital knowledge and expertise. That is how to cultivate digital knowledge and expertise. Anyone, please? Anyone from group number 2?
That might be, I could be wrong. I honestly, with the names of the groups, they just kind of, so it's how to plan for digital delivery. Is that the same?
1 second. No, digital delivery will be number 3.
Okay.
So this was about digital knowledge and expertise. If anybody would like to identify themselves, please. Otherwise, we could let you go, Liz, since you are ready, and we will return to number 2. How about that?
Sure.
Thank you.
I took some very basic notes, but we talked a lot about some barriers and success stories and programs that we've run amongst their group members, and just tools that we thought were very great, and like debriefing notes. So I talked a little bit about a project I run called the Intergenerational Learning Project, where we ran into some issues of translation, linguistic barriers. A lot of the elders in Scarborough spoke different languages and had difficulty conversing with each other. So subtitles and having, I think we talked about Otter.ai was a really promising software for automatically generating subtitles in different languages for anyone who needed it as a real-time sort of support. And instead of having to think about it in a real world sort of setting of, we would normally have translators in real time repeating what was said in a different language. So it's really thinking about the opportunities that being online afforded us. Someone else mentioned that they were teaching online and using software to teach, using GarageBand and using Tinkercad or things like that, things that could be easily screen shared, which use less bandwidth on the internet, was a really great way to plan for instruction. We also talked about various different platforms and trainings that would be helpful, such as the New Horizons for Seniors program to help with familiarization with online platforms, talking about gather.town as a place of gathering and doing choir and singing concerts on Zoom, which is kind of chaotic, and embracing that element of the platform. If I'm missing anything and someone wants to jump in, that would be also appreciated.
Thank you so much, Liz, for stepping in. And as Liz already said, if anybody wants to add anything to this, please feel free to do so.
We also talked about considering the barriers beforehand and how to navigate. And this was especially for when you're holding the hybrid models. And so considering the hybrid venues and how accessible they are to get to them. And then also we talked about marketing on how to bring audiences that used to be physical now to online. And that would be through some traditional methods like just using posters.
Thank you so much, Sarita. And if anybody else, that's your last chance. Thank you very much, group number 2. Oh, sorry, this was group number 3, but just also not to make it confusing going forward. How about we do go back to group number 2, and this time maybe I will just call Amanda Singh from Scarborough Arts, who was the facilitator of the group, to just maybe briefly introduce us to what was happening in the room. Or again, if anybody who was in the room with Amanda, who maybe it will be easier to identify groups like that, would like to speak, please. Also, if you don't have anything to share, that's also fine, but just
I was in that room. I can speak. My name is Wendy. I'll speak briefly, and then hopefully others in the group can join in. We started, I guess, because we're a group of artists, we're very positive people. We really started out with the very positive impact, I think, of digital programming and the flexibility, huge increase to access and accessibility for people, reaching out to more people. The cost, in some way, even this today would have been very expensive if we were all gathering in a conference room. It can be environmentally beneficial, the commuting. So we started out very much, I think, on a positive note, and then started to look at the challenges. And one of the big conversations that came out was just training, having practical training tools and skill development, as well as that someone noted that during the pandemic, some people were introduced to technology. So there was a bit of a missing step, in that this was some people's introduction to technology, and that we need to also help people feel comfortable in this space. And further on the conversation, talking about how digital can be particularly, some things are suited to online, whereas some things are really just not, the best environment is not online, so that we still need that community hub, the space where people can gather, and then there's an opportunity to have online interactions. So particularly interesting conversation was that needing to increase our ability to engage people in an online forum. That lately it seems, and I think everyone agreed, that there's just too much presenting, too much lecturing, whereas in the breakout room, there's that opportunity to discuss and have conversations. So how can we find ways that are just more engaging in an online platform, as well as offer opportunities for us to creatively explore. Then there was a little bit of conversation about just challenges also to outreach. It's, some people it's easier to hand out flyers and have conversations with people, but it's really difficult to find, to get information out there through digital means, and it's very hard to find that information. So again, kind of circling back, and that those personal community spaces, in-person community spaces, are really important, and that we need to look at a balanced approach and how to use the benefits of digital as an opportunity outside of those personal in-person spaces.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And just again, opening the floor to anyone who would like to add anything. Okay, if you haven't identified and you still have the chance, then perhaps we'll slowly, while still letting you the chance to speak if you'd like.
I'll jump in on one quick thing that also was discussed a little bit. It was related to the point about how we just kind of jumped into this, and how there's a bit of a gap maybe on the education side. But I think part of the discussion was also there's a bit of a gap on kind of the trust side as well, and kind of the confidence side, and just getting people feeling comfortable. That next level of comfort with the use of the technology was also something we talked about.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. That's how you should do it. So you just need to unmute yourself and go. So going 3, going 2, if anyone still has some comments, going 1. And if by this time nobody speaks, we will let group number 4 perhaps speak about their findings. Group number 4 was discussing how to pay for digital programming resources. And this group was facilitated by Sari Zon from Art Starts. Perhaps that would be easier for you guys to remember which group that was. If anybody from the group or Sari would like to present, we welcome you.
I was in the room for group 4, and I volunteered to summarize our conversation.
Awesome.
When we talked about funding, I think what everyone's challenges kind of fit into was that the existing structures and timelines and expectations for funding were mostly developed before hybrid and digital programming became a necessity or a norm. So some of the needs that we're trying to meet through our programming, or the needs that we don't realize are there until the digital programming starts, aren't reflected in the ways that grant budgets could allocate things line by line. So some of the specific challenges people faced included having funding for equipment for accessibility for hybrid programming, and in terms of equipment, in terms of staffing to operate that equipment, and in terms of like the added supports needed to make sure that programming reached everyone if it was digital, as well as digital skills upgrading for organizations, knowing how to use those tools and having staff who are experienced in non-digital forms be able to translate that to an online experience, as well as not knowing the funding you need until you need it. And some of the solutions or hopes that came up were skills exchanges, were having more opportunities to pay and seek out that expertise and include it in funding budgets. And there was a really good one, I don't want to forget it. Oh, yes. One of the solutions was to push for more, I forget the word, unstructured. No, someone please who's in the room, please fill in. But there was a word for unrestricted. Thank you, Nina Lee. Yes, unrestricted funding, so that as organizations realize the needs they're trying to meet with digital programming, they can adapt and, fairly pay people or bring on more staff as the needs present themselves and have that flexibility. Yeah. So it was a really good conversation. And one of the things that I think a lot of people resonated with that came up in the chat was that we all agree that Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue is real. But at the same time, there is this sort of minimizing of the labor of online facilitators, or almost expecting people to do things for cheaper or free because it's online. And so that disconnect is also a bit of a barrier for funding or for opportunities. And if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Thank you so much, Zen. Yeah, it will be amazing to hear from anyone else. If you would like to add to it, please just unmute yourself. By now, I think we're all warmed up, and we should feel free to just unmute ourselves and speak. Going 3, going 2, going 1. Anyone? No? Thank you so much again, Zen. How about we then let group number 5 to share their findings. Group number 5 discussed how to measure digital programming impacts. And this group was facilitated by Kshama Patel from Arts Etobicoke.
Hey, everyone. So I fulfilled my facilitator role in some small piece, and the piece that I forgot was taking notes while I was facilitating. So I am going to present, but I want my group to feel free to jump in and fill in the holes. So with measuring impact and along with measuring impact, you're talking about data collection. So definitely the idea came up as what is successful is doing collecting information before programming starts and after it starts, so that you can do comparison and see. That's a very good way to measure impact. It's also really key in terms of that before and after piece to think about your program delivery before you start delivering it. Sometimes digital platforms is not the way to go, but in the process of thinking about things beforehand, you think about how you're going to collect your data, what you're going to collect, so that you can report on a program afterwards. Another success that was shared was moving away from the platforms that we all jumped onto at the beginning that were easily available, which is Zoom, Teams, Meet, and to look at the e-learning platforms. And the success with the e-learning platforms is that those platforms better allow for, excuse me, various methods of engagement, as well as better back-end metrics, so that you can actually see the engagement levels and participation levels, and have more information on that for your post-programming impact. And some of those platforms were shared in our group and were captured in our notes, so that will come in the report afterwards. The other thing that we discussed is the complexity of gathering data while people are participating. So depending upon your space, a digital platform, we have seen the challenges of that, and it's not just in the digital platform, but in other spaces as well as the kind of language that you use in your data collection process, and that you're using clean language. So not using language that leads people to respond in a certain way or to give you certain answers back. Resources, there are actually, so another thing that came up that people shared is that there are resources out there to help us with evaluation, or the OTF grants have a budget, within their budget structure, there's a line where you can hire outside evaluations, so that it's not something that has to be on your plate, which is particularly great when you're one of the smaller organizations and you're one person, 2 people, 3 people wearing many hats, so that you can put some money towards evaluation of your programming, as well as there are other community resources, which again, those things are shared in our notes, and we'll come back to the group in the post post town hall report. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is the idea of this collaborative sharing that we do among the groups and how we learn from each other and utilize that, and how does that information feed back to our funders as well. I feel like I caught maybe 75%. If there's anybody else from my group that would care to jump in and add, that'd be great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the floor is yours. If you would like to add anything that you like stood out to you, we welcome you. Going 3, going 2, going 1. Any more thoughts? Welcome. But if not, we are officially ended this part 20 minutes earlier than we even, budgeted for this. So I think this is one of those a few unique events where we're so on time and then even earlier, which is amazing because of course it leaves some more space for us to just breathe and connect. Thank you so much for everyone who shared. I know like we're putting you on the spot, so like you did amazing. Thank you so much again. So maybe we could take this space now before we officially end our event to kind of reflect back from what you've heard from all of the 5 groups. Of course, you did in-depth discussions in your own group, but you also just heard from all other 4. So perhaps the question is easy, something that you feel is shaping up into a trend or like a common thread that you noticed throughout the conversations, throughout the groups, or perhaps there is something that jumped out at you, was surprising finding today. If you would like to share either by unmuting yourself, you just feel free, you can raise a hand, that will make us, well, that will make it a bit easier, or just drop it in the chat. If anybody would like to go, this is a free-form conversation. This is the really very close to the end of our event. And also reminding you before we do go, we would love to take some screenshots just also to remind ourselves for later in time that we were here all together just like this. So if you would like to actually open your camera to let us see your beautiful faces, or if you would like to actually close your camera, that's up to you. But this is the moment where we would like to do it. If everybody is good and give us thumbs up, we would proceed with that. Thank you so much. I hope you all heard. We're taking some screenshots while we're still here and still smiling. You can wave in the camera. Here we go. It's so nice to see your beautiful smiles. Thank you so much. It was such an amazing, I know we didn't really talk and you kind of heard like me for the most part, but thank you so much for interacting with our presentation, whether by annotation tool or your emojis. It definitely does brighten up the space. And so we're thankful for you being just great, amazing participants of today's town hall. Okay, so let's go back to our questions. I think screenshots have been taken. Thank you so much. So the questions were, and it is a free form discussion, whether there was something that really stood out to you, whether it was a kind of a forming trend, or there was some findings or sharings that you've heard that jumped out at you as a surprise. Or also just generally, how you're feeling and how you're feeling with community arts, how you're feeling about digital programming and virtual and hybrid programming as well.
I think John has his hands up.
Oh, sorry. Yes, John, please go ahead. Please just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat and the discussion about what is trust-based philanthropy, sort of as something that's happening in the environmental space. I haven't done any research into it. I plan on doing it, but I just wondering if the people who brought that to the table can talk about that a little bit more, because I think that the idea around that, I think, from what I heard briefly, was that it relates to unrestricted funds, the opportunity to have more dollars to look after some maybe admin, as well as being flexible in the kind of programming. So I was wondering if anybody, the people who brought that up, had anything additional to add.
Thank you very much, John. I also do see in the chat that I did see actually keywords being dropped that was unrestricted. And also Zarita from Lakeshore Arts did mention that the conversation on unrestricted funding is one that's coming up a lot, which we also saw in the chat as well. And it is important as it gives us the ability to choose where funding can go to support our organization needs. If anybody would like perhaps to talk about that, because we saw people also agreeing with that thread. Just to repeat, that comment was about unrestricted funding.
Sorry, I guess I wasn't listening close enough. Unrestricted funding as in from the government or from philanthropy? I'm not too sure where that would come from.
Thank you very much for that follow-up question. Perhaps those who were in the chat, and I see Sylvie is raising her hand. How about explaining a little bit more? Thank you.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about unrestricted funds in the chat, as well as this, oh, now I'm spotlit, this new model of funding that's been floating around called trust-based philanthropy. And I'm trying to remember who brought it up. I think Sari might have some more insight into trust-based philanthropy than I do, but I first came across the term in the environmental sector because my work is at the intersection of art and environmentalism. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was doing some climate action programming with youth, I came across this term, and it's meant to describe, from my understanding, funds that, so instead of, in the traditional funding model, we have to identify a problem and justify why we need funding and exactly where the funding is going to go. And that is how the funding is distributed based on a specific problem that we're addressing. In trust-based philanthropy, in my experience, it's more about putting the power back in the hands of the practitioners, the funders understanding that practitioners have this lived experience of working with the community and are going to use the funds in a way that makes most sense and is appropriate for the circumstances that they're under. So I personally haven't seen a lot of trust-based philanthropy within the arts and culture sector, but it might just be because I first came across it in the environmental sector. So I'd be interested to learn if other folks have seen it emerging, but I feel like it's a topic that I'd love to see funders talk more about. It's along the lines of unrestricted funds, is how can we give funding that is actually going to make an impact within our ever-evolving circumstances. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my understanding of how these two different terms intersect. And I'd be interested to see moving forward, like one of the suggestions that or one of the things I noticed that I mentioned in the chat is there were some larger foundations within the environmental sector that were piloting these microgrant programs, that they were just giving out funds to youth groups to do great work. And then now some of those programs have evolved into these full-on trust-based philanthropy programs where, for example, the Youth Harbor is one of the big ones, which is through, I think it's the Environmental Stewardship Foundation. Youth can apply for however much funding they think they need. And they're creating the project without these set parameters as delineated, like as determined by the funder. It's more about the youth coming up with an idea, or in this case, it would be nonprofits, different community groups, collectives coming up with the ideas they want to implement, and then fitting within a particular set of values rather than specific like problem-oriented objectives, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of people are adding things to the chat, so I'll let the chat go on, and if other folks want to share what they know about trust-based philanthropy or non-restricted funds, I'd love to hear as well.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. And what you just actually described, I feel in a way really also echoes what community arts is about. Like we as community engaged artists don't come with like a certain, you know, methodology that we just kind of force upon participants, but we hear from them what they would like to do with us, and like we hear them to inform our decisions, and that's how it goes. So I feel it's actually the first time for me to hear about this trust-based philanthropy, and I feel like it really fits this space that we are in, like the community engaged arts philanthropy. Oh, sorry, the community engaged arts field. I saw John's hand briefly. Would you like to speak, John?
No, that was just a thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you, John. That's awesome. Also, please keep being, you know, supportive of each other's speaking. So definitely we support the use of emojis and various supportive and positive comments in the chat. I think it's always appreciated. If anyone would like to add to that thread, or also we're always open to hear other ideas. Again, just to remind everyone, I know this is like, it's been a long meeting. We are now reflecting back onto what we have heard from all the 5 groups, or perhaps even in your own group to kind of talk what we heard. David and Stephen, how about we go in that order? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm reflecting back on what Pat Tobin said about the priorities of the city and how they're reorganizing everything, and looking at the arts as kind of a critical component for economic development of the city after the pandemic, and talking about how, you know, expecting ways to be more accountable to the city in terms of our outcomes, things like that. And I was wondering because this is our discussion today is much heavy on the digital transformation and using tools and how that's all going to happen. And I was wondering if the city, the cultural department, Toronto Culture would be able to, you know, look at it as a two-way street too, that obviously they are in touch with major cultural institutions, major festivals. It's almost like some of the smaller groups that put on events are, you know, looking at growing them and looking at systems like a CRM, or a donor management system. Is there an audience management system that people are finding successful to use? I did some research, and it's very expensive, but it's, it has to be tailor-made to the situation, and obviously has to be integrated with your current systems. I'm just wondering if there's a way to encourage Pat and people at the city, if there's a way to give us information back of what they found were best practices that we can learn from, rather than all of us doing our own piecemeal things, that if there are best practices that we don't know about on a larger level, that we can learn from that. So that's kind of my message. Is there a way to create a dialogue so that it's more than just the funding, it's getting information, best practices, especially at this critical stage. So those are my comments.
Thank you so much, David. And I will let Stephen speak, please, and then perhaps
Yeah, thank you. Sort of tying into that trust-based piece, and also about these metrics, is when we, you know, as we're dealing with community, it's a bit like international development type approaches where complexity and uncertainty are much higher. So we're in a state where, you know, things like trust-based approaches make a lot of sense because you can't necessarily always use best practices. It may be being attuned to the problems. So it may be, so often what's being shared now is where the things aren't working, so that you have the things that trip people up, so that you're getting early warnings of what might be potentially challenging in an environment. And that also then becomes more relevant when talking about multi-service stakeholders. So you've got, you know, are you dealing with therapeutic? Are you dealing with physical? Are you dealing with, you know, maybe there's bits of all these types of things going on. So, you know, each one can kind of make their own metrics, but when you're sort of moving between things and you don't know which way you're going to have to move, and no one can, then you can't actually use a causal one-to-one relationship. You need to use what they call a complex adaptive systems approach, or a non-linear approach, where you're looking at the dynamics going on. So I'm wondering how trust is a big part of that. I think, like, it becomes a currency that is never exactly defined, right? But so that may be a trust, or maybe you recognize when you can't necessarily be sure, so there's uncertainty, you know. So trust isn't necessarily a virtual, we don't want it to be a virtue signaling approach, right? They don't want to get stuck in one of those things. It wants to be actually something that's kind of grounded in science in some way, and I think that could be really powerful. So, you know, chipping in.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think that's a very interesting thread that has been formed. Unexpected to me personally, again, because today I'm learning about this concept myself. I wonder if anybody wants to join in this thread and add your thoughts, even your reactions to, like, if you have found about it today, or you also have something else that you would like to talk about that again stood out to you in our conversation.
We had, when we started this town hall, we heard from the presenters, Nordicity and from the city of Toronto. What I heard was that there are opportunities, but I don't know what the opportunities are. Even with all the graphs and the stats and everything, I felt like it was just holding up a mirror to our situation, and whether we can see the real opportunities or not, I don't know. But I heard also today that everyone doesn't want to let this drop. Like, this ball is very it's very shiny. It has potential. I was saying earlier that we face this perhaps too much on the screen, where we get fatigue from doing this. So my first reaction is to think that this is going to go away once we hit 2024 or something. And perhaps there really are no opportunities here. I don't think that should be our starting point. So if perhaps next time we could talk about the way that people know how to use it or not to use it, would be a very good thing. I feel that I'm missing the sort of support, what's that called? I feel I'm missing the subject matter, the real substance of the Zoom world, of the artificial world, of the virtual world. So yeah, I just, you know, I feel I'm just coping with the virtual world, and I'm not 100% convinced that it's a thriving virtual world. So.
Thank you so much, Elisa, for your sharing. It's definitely, I think, shared. This struggle is shared across the board, in this room, outside of this room, I mean, virtual space. Totally. If anybody would like to, yes, please, Cindy.
I just wanted to say, in our group, we talked a bit about best practices, and we did share some toolkits, online resources that'll be captured in the notes and sent to everyone. In particular, Devin at Scarborough Philharmonic, through a study by Orchestra Canada, has a resource kit that's available for download and sharing through Orchestra Canada. And someone else in the group shared an online toolkit for students and digital connection with youth. And so, you know, there are those opportunities. And I think we talked about best practices, and I think working together to share what worked for us and what didn't work for some of us is going to be an ongoing discussion. And I think that it's important that we continue to connect and share those resources in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cindy. I think sharing resources will be always like key. And it is in these kind of spaces that we learn, co-learn from each other on those best practices. This today was the day to share. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I just want to, I'm wondering if there's any way to make this an ongoing thing. It seems like every time we have one of these things, it's, you know, there's the one-off. Usually it's a different organization that picks it up and runs with it for, you know, for a while, but we're not really harnessing sort of our own community on an ongoing basis when it comes to these things, or at least that's my experience with it. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to sort of make this, let's say, in 3 months' time, there will be another town hall. And in the meantime, this is how you share, you know, I mean, knowledge. This is how, if there was any thought given to that, because again, I don't have the answer, but I'm just wondering if there's and happy to help if there is any way to do that, and it needs resources.
Thank you very much, Rakafet. If anybody has answers to that, please jump in. But also, just a note, we will be closing this event with also news on how to stay in touch and to the follow-up after this event. So perhaps you will be also hearing some answers to those questions, sorry.
I have a, this is very impromptu, but just a follow-up to the last comment that was made. Just out of curiosity, of the group that is still online, who would be interested in something like this? So a follow-up event like this in the future. You maybe put an emoji of some kind. Just for us, for the organizers to understand what the type of demand would be.
Totally. You could please use a thumbs up, hearts, any emoji that will go after this follow-up question will be considered as a yes, as an answer to this. Probably if we could actually take Christina off the spotlight, we will then see all of the room with emojis, and we'll go one more round, please. Could you please either raise your actual real thumbs up or just use emoji for amazing. Honestly, I think it's kind of almost the whole room. And I obviously agree that there is need in that. And I think we are, as community engaged artists, are obviously interested in the community. We are working with community, but we sometimes lack our own community together like this to share our best practices and advices. Thank you very much. Thank you all who responded. We still do have time, of course, again, no pressure, but we still do have time for any other thoughts that you might have. Please, Sylvie.
I was just going to say, just a note before we leave, it might be helpful if we want to continue sessions like this in the future, if we want to get funding for it, would it be helpful, I guess is my question, for us to write yes in the chat, because I'm not sure how you would tally everyone. It's a logistical thing. And then the other point I was going to bring up is, I feel like there isn't, in my research, I haven't found quite the right platform for ongoing conversation between folks in terms of building out a community of practice. But the closest thing I have found is a platform called Mighty Networks, which some of you might be familiar with. And it's really used quite a bit overseas, but it's expensive for an organization to purchase and then facilitate that community of practice. But if there's ongoing interest from lots of people to share resources, which is something I really appreciated from today, that might be something we'd like to collectively explore together. It's kind of like Facebook, but it's separate from all of the commercialization and ads. So you can just share ideas and get feedback and ideas, as well as direct message people, which is really nice. It's like your own little bubble away from all of the other big platforms. So just putting that out there, and I'll add the link to the chat for folks who are asking.
Thank you, Sylvie. You are an amazing source of knowledge today. So awesome. Thank you so much. We do come closer to the time point where we would, close the event slowly. Just giving you last chance, if you have something burning and you haven't yet expressed yourself, please just unmute yourself and the mic is yours. Thank you all. I understand that we kind of very natural and very organically, like all the time that we have, like throughout the event we come to the moment of closing, and I would really love to pass it on to Wendy Rading from Artsy Topical to close it off and also to follow up on what is next.
Thank you very much. I have the pleasure of thanking you all for coming and contributing your thoughts and ideas during this session. It's been a pleasure to see all of you and connect with many of you. And we're very grateful for this wonderful turnout, which has made for a very dynamic and vibrant conversation. So the next steps, you will receive a survey following up on this event. And as Shana noted in the chat, maybe we can add a question about how you'd all like to continue on this conversation in that survey. So please fill it out. Through that, we'll be able to capture your thoughts on community arts in Toronto, where we are now, and the evolving shift to digital spaces. And from that survey, but also our discussion today, a report will be produced by the Armstrong Strategy Group and circulated to all of you. Thank you to all the organizers of this event. It has taken a village to run a town hall. This event involved individuals from Sketch, Art Starts, Jumblies, Neighborhood Art Network, Vibe Arts, and the 6 LASOs, Arts Tobico, Lakeshore Arts, North York Arts, Scarborough Arts, Urban Arts, and a huge shout out to the team at East End Arts, led by Shana, who did a lot of the heavy lifting on this one. Thank you to our speakers, our moderator, Ksenia Troy, you've done a wonderful job today. Thank you, Pat Tobin, who's not with us anymore, or not right online with us, but thank you for coming from the City of Toronto. And thank you, Mila DeChef-Tweddle from Nordicity. A huge thank you to Armstrong Strategic Group for the note-taking throughout the event and the report and reporting back to us on our learnings. Thank you to our great facilitators and our chat moderators. It's not an easy task to do either of those, so thank you for supporting those conversations in the breakout room. And the Canopy Town Hall and the follow-up report was funded by the Ontario Arts Council. Also, thank yous to a grant from the Canada Council of the Arts Digital Strategies Fund. We were able to work with Nordicity and the Research and Impact team at the Toronto Arts Foundation to put together the initial report. And lastly, thank you to the City of Toronto for their continued support for community arts in Toronto, especially during the last couple of years of difficult times. So as noted earlier, please reach out to any of us if you have any thoughts or questions following this event. And thank you very much for coming out, and enjoy the rest of your Monday and the rest of your week. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. We see a lot of, again, positive comments in the
Thank you.
chat. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you and bye-bye.